Ladies and gentlemen, probably making resound some bells at 10 o'clock at night is maybe just the right way to initiate this last lecture. And managing a place like this, inviting you here tonight, and we are very happy that you came in such a big crowd, made us think that maybe talking about something that we are so used to, which is music, which is listening, that we might not know what we are doing. Maybe we know what sounds are, but maybe we do not know what listening is. And why did I start with bells? These bells are a part of a composition made by a British 20th century composer, Jonathan Harvey. Maybe some of you know him, maybe some don't. Doesn't matter actually. He's an important composer of classical music in the 20th century. But he uses bells, and we all know bells. For me as a kid, bells were everywhere in the town where I grew up. Bells, church bells that would say the time. Bells in carillon that would play tunes. They would play it on fixed dates. They would play it on fixed days in the week. They would play it in concerts. But anyway, those bells were there everywhere. And I think for all those here in the room, and especially in this part of Europe, bells are part of our life, but we don't know. We are not listening to them. But if you listen carefully, and if you did listen carefully to the excerpt of the piece, there was a small voice coming up. And the bell is coming in. Actually, what is happening there? That is where contemporary music gets a certain form. That's where, in a certain moment, the sound we are used to turns into something that is a construction of the mind, of the heart, that is responding to an idea, to something that somebody needs to express. That is, in a way, what I would like to go through with you tonight. Making this path a little bit more soft. Very often when we're in concert hall and we don't know a piece, and we did not rehearse it, but could you play, Waldo? This is our pianist, Waldo. Could you play the Sonate Facile by Mozart? Just a few first bars. Is that possible for you? Do, mi, sol, si, do, re, do. Thank you. He really plays everything. This piece, we all know it. Yes, please. This was really not rehearsed. This is a piece we all know and we all like. But actually, is it natural? The bells were much more natural. They are something, if you listen well, carefully to these bells, they have some spectrum, as we call it. When you listen to a bell, and to many bells together, that was the sound you heard, you have all kind of rhythms, all kind of tunes, all kind of notes. And although they started the bells all on the same moment, they never resound on the same moment. Why? Because they have their own life, they have their own shape, they have their own sound, they have their own tune. And you just can't stop that. Once it starts, it gets its own life. And what is important is to accept that the sounds, that they are part of this surrounding you are living in. So in a way, the first path you could take to go through a new listening, to an avoidance of fear maybe. The word fear, we just heard a very interesting story about fear and about what we can do with it and how it can move us. The fear of new sounds, we can make it disappear. Actually, if you just think, if you would be afraid of new sounds, that means you would be afraid of progress. Can you imagine that you would always read the same book, that Balzac novel, 19th century? There is 150 years of literature written after. And in a way, we are listening, we want to read new books, but when it's about new music, suddenly there is something that we feel a little bit awkward about. So the first path is to know that you and your own feelings are in the center of the capturing these sounds, of hearing what it is about, and of capturing these sounds that are surrounding you. A second path could be a total different one. There is a surrounding around us, that is one that we talk a lot about. We talked about it tonight. It's the environment, it's nature. Nature was there a long time before us. It makes its own sounds. It has its own ways of presenting music in a way. And one of the most interesting animals that we know that is making music before we did are birds. And that is Jonathan Harvey, but actually that is Olivier Messiaen. And Olivier Messiaen was one of these huge composers of the 20th century who was inspired by two things. He was inspired by religion, but most of all, he was inspired by birds. And you see in this very sexy outfit, he went a lot through mountains, through meadows, through woods, and he would listen to birds. He would see, he was an ornithologist, and he would write down in music scales the singing of a bird. And I think we should listen to one of these singings. It's Le Merle Noir. He did 4 times a tune. None of the 4 times were identical. They were different. There are different rhythmical patterns, sometimes more notes, sometimes less. But in the end, there is some kind of thematic thing in the middle that is always the same, and that makes that he is a Merle Noir. And Messiaen knew exactly about all the birds he has heard, but not only in Europe, but he traveled all around the world, and he made a catalogue des oiseaux. He made a catalogue of birds with all these bird songs. And then he used these bird songs in his compositions. And it is very, very strange. When we hear this, when we're having breakfast, we're on holiday, we're having breakfast, we hear these birds. We think it's perfectly natural. We think it's fantastic. We don't run away from the hall, the concert hall we might be sitting at later on the day, because Messiaen made a composition of it using the same tune. Waldo, could you play that, please? very much. Of course, there are more notes here than the bird that is singing. There are very high notes, there are lower notes. That's Messiaen is making a story with it. He's also talking about the trees, about the wind, about the water he heard in the woods where he was walking. He takes all these elements and makes one big picture of it. But in the end, this kind of little song, it is there. It is always coming back with a little variation, with a little imagination of the composer. So nature is a real powerful power station for the imagination of composers. And it should be for us because we know this power station and we know these elements. But there is maybe one element that we know best, and it's the third path that gives us information about what we are listening at, and it's silence. And I take you to, after this bird, to another country, Estonia. And in Estonia, you have these huge, huge parks. You have these huge lakes, huge woods. Actually, you have them everywhere in Scandinavia. And there is a French writer, Marguerite Yourcenar, and she says that actually music is the water that comes out of the well of silence. Silence is the fuel for the imagination of the composer. What you hear now is a composition by Arvo Pärt. Arvo Pärt, he is one of the eldest composers still alive in Europe. One of the most original, one of the most powerful. And he grew up with all kinds of aesthetics in the 20th century. But at a certain moment, he just wanted to go back and express the things around him. And if you've been traveling through Nordic countries, one of the most powerful things you see, or you hear, or you don't hear, is silence. So he expresses this. And in a certain way, by expressing the unexpressible, by making audible the inaudible, he brings you to an higher level. For some, he will bring you to a God, or maybe to God. It depends on what you believe in. But in a way, it's a religious experience. But it is contemporary music. It is modern music. It is a new music. So in the end, when listening to all this music, when we know what it is about, we need a path. And when I think about a path that you might know in contemporary art, in visual art, is Picasso. We know about Picasso. We know about the way he made abstractions of things. And the path for listening should be the same path as for him, as for Picasso drawing a bull. You know this bull. And look how he's going to change it. It gets a structure. It gets lines. It gets less colors. And in the end, it becomes this. Maybe it's a bull, maybe it's a bike. So maybe listening better is just turning the bull in your head in a bike. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes,